Chapter 2 The Mail. England, November 1775. The road to Dover and the Royal George Hotel in Dover. On a Friday night, late in November, it was the Dover Road that lay ahead of the first of the persons in our story. The Dover Road lay ahead of the mail coach as it struggled up Shooter's Hill. The man walked uphill in the mud beside the coach, not because he had any taste for walking in such circumstances, but because the hill and the mud and the mail were all so heavy that the horses had already come to a stop 3 times, as well as on one occasion turning the coach across the road, trying to go back in the opposite direction. There was a steaming mist rising from all the hollows and rolling up the hills, like an evil spirit seeking rest and finding none. It was thick enough to shut out everything but a few yards of road from the light of the coach lamps. 2 other passengers were also walking up the hill beside the coach. All 3 were wrapped in heavy coats up to their ears, and they wore long boots on their feet. Not one of the 3 could have said what the other were like. In those days, travelers were very shy of revealing themselves to others. Anyone might be a robber or working with robbers. The Dover mail coach was as it always was. The guard suspected the passengers suspected one another, and the guard, they all suspected everyone else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horses. "Woohoo!" cried the coachman. "Joe?" "Halloa," the guard replied. "What time do you make it, Joe?" 10 minutes past 11. "My blood!" exclaimed the coachman angrily. "And not yet at the top of Shooter's Hill." "Tst! Yeah, get on with you." The horses felt the coachman's whip and started forward. Once more the coach struggled on. This last burst brought them to the top of the hill, and the guard got down to open the door and led the passengers back inside. "Joe," the coachman said again, "listen." They both listened. "It's a horse coming up quite fast." "Gentlemen, in the king's name, all of you," the guard said to the passengers, and with that he prepared his gun and stood ready to fire. With the coach not moving, the night seemed even quieter, and the sound of a galloping horse was heard louder and louder. "Oh, there!" the guard shouted as loud as he could. "Stand! I shall fire!" The horse slowed, and a man's voice came through the mist. "Is that the Dover mail?" "Why do you want to know?" "I want a passenger, if it's Mr. Garve's lorry." "If it's Mr. Jarve's lorry, keep where you are," the guard called to the voice in the mist, "because if I shouldn't make a mistake, it could never be set right in your lifetime. Gentleman, by the name of Lorry, will you answer?" "What is the matter?" asked one of the passengers. "Who wants me?" "Is it Jerry?" "Yes, Mr. Lorry." "What is the matter?" "A message sent to you from T&Company." I know this messenger guard," said Mr. Lorry. "He may come close. There's nothing wrong." "I hope that's true," said the guard, "but I can't be so sure of it. Hey you, come on at foot pace and keep your hands up." The figure of a horse and rider came slowly through the mist. The rider bent forward and handed the passenger a small folded paper. Both horse and rider were covered in mud from the hoofs of the horse to the man's hat. "Guard," said the passenger, "I work for Tellson's Bank. I'm going to Paris on business. May I read this?" "If so, be as quick as you can, sir." Mr. Lorry opened the paper in the light of the coach lamp and read to himself, and then aloud, "Wait at Dover for Mamselle. It's not long. You see, guard, Jerry, say that my answer was recalled to life." Jerry sat up straight in the saddle. "That's a strange answer," he said. "Take that message back, and they will know that I received this. Make the best of your way. Good night." The coach continued its journey, and as it went down the other side of the hill, the mist grew thicker and thicker. When the mail coach reached Dover in the course of the morning, the head doorman at the Royal George Hotel opened the coach door, as was his custom. He did it with a touch of excitement, for the arrival of a coach from London in winter was an achievement. By that time, there was only one person left in the coach. The other two had already been set down at their roadside destinations. "Will there be a boat to Calais tomorrow?" the passenger asked the doorman. "Yes, sir, if the weather holds and the wind is fair. The tide will be right at about 2 in the afternoon." "Bet, sir?" "I'll not go to the bed till night, but I want a bedroom and a barber." "And then breakfast, sir?" "Yes, sir." "This way, sir, if you please." The head doorman then spoke to a maid. "Show that gentleman to his room, and take the gentleman's bag and some hot water to his room." Some time later, Mr. Lorry, dressed in a well-worn but very well-kept brown suit, came down from his room for breakfast. The coffee room was empty. A table was set for him by the fire, and as he sat with its light shining on him, waiting for the meal, he might have been sitting for his portrait. His face had a quiet look, but he had a pair of bright eyes. They suggested that he may have had difficulty as a younger man in keeping the serious expression required of an employee of Tellson's Bank. Tired by the long journey, Mr. Lorry at once fell asleep, but the arrival of breakfast roused him. He then spoke to one of the hotel clerks. "I wish a room to be prepared for a young lady who may come at any time today. She may ask for Mr. Jarvis Lorry, or she may only ask for a gentleman from Tellson's Bank. Please let me know." "Yes, sir." "Tellson's Bank in London, sir?" "Yes." "Yes, sir. We often have the honor of entertaining gentlemen traveling backwards and forwards between London and Paris, sir. A vast amount of traveling, sir, in Tellson and Company." "Yes, we are quite a French company, as well as an English one." "Yes, sir. Not in the habit of much traveling yourself, I think, sir." "Not in recent times. It is 15 years since I came last from France." When Mr. Lorry had finished, he went out for a stroll along the beach. As afternoon approached, the air, which had been clear enough to allow the French coast to be seen, became misty. Mr. Lorry's thoughts seemed to cloud too. When it was dark, he sat before the coffee-room fire, awaiting his dinner as he had awaited breakfast. As he was finishing his dinner, he heard the rattling of wheels up the narrow street, and a coach rumbled into the yard. "This is Mamselle," he said to himself. A few minutes later, a waiter came in with the message that Miss Manet had arrived from London. She was most anxious to see the gentleman from Tellson's immediately. "If it suits his pleasure and convenience." Mr. Lorry got up, and the waiter led the way to find her. Waiting to meet him was a young woman who wasn't more than 17. She was wearing a riding coat and had a straw hat in her hand. His eyes met hers. They were blue and had a questioning expression. She was a short, pretty figure, but her forehead lifted and frowned in an expression not of confusion, wonder, or alarm, but of all three mixed together. As his eyes rested on these things, a sudden vivid likeness passed before him of a child whom he had held in his arms on the passage across that very channel one cold day when the hail was heavy and the sea ran high. The likeness passed away, and he made his formal bow to Miss Manet. "Please take a seat," she said in a clear and pleasant young voice, a little foreign in its accent, but only a little. "I received a letter from the bank, sir, yesterday, telling me about the discovery of some property of my long-dead father, whom I never saw. It made a visit to Paris necessary in order to speak to a gentleman of the bank, who had been sent there for the purpose. I told the bank, sir, that I would appreciate it highly if I could travel under that gentleman's protection. The gentleman had left London, but I think a messenger was sent after him to request him to wait for me here. I was happy," said Mr. Lorry, "to be asked. I will be more than happy to carry out the request. Sir, I thank you. The bank told me that the gentleman would explain the details of the business, and that I must prepare myself to find them of a surprising nature. I am naturally very eager to know what they are." "Naturally?" said Mr. Lorry. "Yes, He paused and then added, "It's very difficult to begin." He didn't begin, but being undecided, he glanced at her. The young forehead lifted itself into that expression that was both special and attractive, and she raised her hand as if catching at some passing shadow. "Are you a complete stranger to me, sir?" "Miss Manet, I am a man of business. I have business to do. When you hear what I have to say, only think of me as a speaking machine. In truth, I am not much else. I will, with your permission, tell you the story of one of our customers. He was a French gentleman, a scientific gentleman, a man of great achievements, a doctor." "Of Beauvais?" "Why, yes, like Monsieur Manet, your father. The gentleman was a Beauvais, like Monsieur Manet, your father. The gentleman had a good reputation in Paris. I had the honor of knowing him there. Our relations were business relations. I was at that time in our French company and had been, 20 years. At that time? I may ask, at what time, sir?" 20 years ago, miss. He married an English lady, and I was one of the trustees. His affairs, like the affairs of many other French gentlemen and French families, were entirely in Townsend's hands. In a similar way, I am or I have been trustee of one kind or other for many of our customers. These are only business relations, miss. But this is my father's story, sir, and I begin to think that when I was left an orphan through my mother dying when I was 2, it was you who brought me to England. I am almost sure it was you. Mr. Lorry took her hand, which she had stretched out to him. "Miss Manet, it was me." Mr. Lorry went on to tell her with much hesitation and insistence upon business that her father hadn't died. He had suddenly and mysteriously disappeared. His wife feared that some enemy might have had him sent to prison by obtaining a letter from the king, something that French nobles had the right to do at that time. But try as she might, she could learn nothing of his fate. She died from a broken heart, I believe, having never given up her efforts to find your father, but she left you to grow up without the dark cloud of living in uncertainty about your father. The expression on Miss Manet's forehead deepened into one of pain and horror. But he has been found, Mr. Lorry continued. He is alive, greatly changed. It's too probable, almost a wreck. It's possible, though. We will hope for the best. Still, he is alive. Your father has been taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, and we are going there. I to identify him if I can, and you to restore him to life, love, duty, rest, and comfort. I am going to see his ghost. It will be his ghost, not him. Perfectly still and silent, she sat with her eyes open and fixed upon him. She held his arm so tightly that he feared to move it for fear of hurting her. Not knowing what to do, he called out loudly for help. A wild-looking woman, whom even in his agitation Mr. Lorry observed to be all of a red color and to have red hair and to be dressed in an extraordinary fashion, came into the room. She took one look at Miss Manet, set a rough hand on Mr. Lorry, and pushed him back against the wall. I really think this must be a man, Mr. Lorry thought to himself. You in brown, the woman said indignantly. Couldn't you tell her what you had to tell her without frightening her to death? Look at her with her pretty pale face and her cold hands. Do you call that being a banker? Mr. Lorry found the question so hard to answer. He could only say, I hope she does well now. No, thanks to you in brown, if she does. She turned to the young woman. My darling, I hope, said Mr. Lorry, that you accompany Miss Manet to France. What an idea, replied the woman. If it was ever intended that I should go across salt water, do you think God would have put me on an island? This being another question hard to answer, Mr. Jarvis Lorry went away to think about it.